The rise of scientific fraud, how it threatens global research. Defect to win, a growing crisis of fraud in science. A recent and thorough investigation published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences on August 4th has raised alarming concerns about the prevalence of systematic scientific fraud. This issue is no longer a minor problem. It has evolved into a widespread, organized, and rapidly escalating threat that undermines the very foundations of research across the globe. The study meticulously breaks down the various players, methods, and the extensive scale of industrialized academic misconduct. The research team, comprising experts from Northwestern University, the NSF Simons National Institute for Theory and Mathematics and Biology, and the University of Sydney, has uncovered how coordinated groups, including paper mills, brokerage firms, compliant editors, and unethical journals, collaborate to produce fraudulent research on a massive scale. In a personal blog post, Reese Richardson, the lead author and a postdoctoral fellow at Northwestern University, expressed, "The scientific community is currently witnessing a significant and organized defection from the principles of scientific public goods. A large number of participants, including scientists, reviewers, editors, and publishers, are opting not to contribute genuinely to the collective knowledge pool, understanding the public goods game." The researchers utilized game theory to frame their analysis, comparing the scientific endeavor to a vast public goods game where progress relies on collaboration, trust, and mutual investment. In this framework, scientists are rewarded with societal benefits such as funding and career advancement in exchange for generating knowledge and mentoring future generations. However, as the complexity and scale of scientific research have expanded, so too have the incentives and opportunities for individuals to defect from these collaborative efforts. The authors noted, while concerns about these pressures compelling individuals to stray from the scientific ethos have existed, the focus has primarily been on isolated actions. Recently, however, there has been a noticeable increase in reports of coordinated fraudulent activities in science. Richardson defined defection as the choice to contribute less than one is capable of, despite having the means to contribute more. He explained that in repeated simulations of public goods games, players gradually learn that defecting offers greater personal advantage, leading them to contribute less to the collective effort. Although some players may still cooperate in good faith, the overall trend shows a decline in contributions, resulting in diminished benefits for the group and an increase in defectors. The paper argues for the use of a game-theoretic framework to analyze research misconduct as a collective issue rather than attributing it solely to individual errors. The authors pointed out that unethical behavior in science is often perceived as a personal failing rather than a systemic issue perpetuated by a network of individuals and organizations. They also highlighted the ambiguity surrounding terms like paper mill, suggesting that some entities might be better described as brokerages. The modern incentive structure. At the core of this crisis lies the contemporary system of academic incentives. Recognition and funding increasingly depend on quantitative measures, such as publication counts, citation metrics, H-indices, and journal impact factors, all of which can be artificially manipulated. The framework of fraud. To conduct their analysis, the research team employed a variety of data sources and analytical tools. They utilized journal and article metadata from platforms like Clarivate's Web of Science, Elsevier's Scopus, PubMed, Medline, and OpenAlex, covering thousands of journals and millions of articles. They also referenced lists of de-indexed journals and early warning lists from Chinese regulatory bodies, alongside data on retracted papers from the Retraction Watch database and critiques from PubPeer. Their findings revealed that certain editors at prominent journals, such as PLOS ONE and Hindawi, were disproportionately involved with articles that were later retracted or received critical feedback. By applying probabilistic modeling and statistical controls, the researchers identified specific editors whose acceptance patterns could not be attributed to chance. These editors, who often published each other's work, formed tight-knit groups that, despite representing less than 1% of all editors, were linked to a significant number of problematic articles. One notable observation was the adaptability of the fraud ecosystem. For instance, organizations like the Academic Research and Development Association, ARDA, in India, not only write and submit papers for clients, but also shift their operations to new journals whenever existing ones face de-indexing or increased scrutiny. Between 2018 and 2024, ARDA expanded its list of guaranteed publication venues from 14 to over 86, including obscure or hijacked journals, as well as those indexed in reputable databases. The researchers noted that the journals associated with ARDA were de-indexed at rates significantly higher than average, often in response to exposure events. Although the de-indexing process was too slow to counteract the surge in fraudulent publications. Evidence from journal archives indicated that many articles published through ARDA's network were out of scope, with a notable portion reflecting improbable international collaborations. For example, in a review of 5 journals from ARDA's offerings, 10.1% of publications featured authors from different countries, and one paper about roasting hazelnuts was found in a journal focused on HIV/AIDS care. This led the researchers to conclude that ARDA was essentially selling authorship to the highest bidders. Alarming statistics. A crucial aspect of the analysis involved constructing networks based on image duplication, a common indicator of fabricated research. The researchers identified large clusters of articles published in the same journal, within the same year, and by the same publishers, all linked through shared or manipulated images. Statistical methods confirmed that these patterns were not random, but indicative of mass production and coordinated efforts. While the entire scientific field is vulnerable, the degree of infiltration varies. By examining closely related subfields in RNA biology, the researchers found that although error rates were similar across various new and expanding fields, retraction rates differed significantly. Subfields characterized by formulaic, template-driven research, such as LNC RNAs, miRNAs, and cancer studies, exhibited retraction rates peaking at 4%, which far exceeded what could be expected from honest mistakes. Perhaps the most concerning data revealed a stark contrast between the volume of fraudulent output and the effectiveness of the systems designed to combat it. The number of suspected paper mill products has been doubling every 1.5 years, a rate estimated to be 10 times faster than legitimate scientific publishing, and far surpassing the growth of both retracted and flagged articles. Even aggressive actions like de-indexing journals have been overshadowed by the sheer number of compromised outlets. Fewer than 100 journals are de-indexed annually, while tens of thousands of journals and an overwhelming number of suspect publications continue to proliferate. The study noted, in response to concerns about editorial practices, a few bibliometric aggregators can de-index a journal. Web of Science and Scopus de-index around 100 journals each year. While this may seem significant, it is 10 times smaller than the number of journals publishing paper mill products. The researchers estimated that only about 25% of suspected paper mill products will ever be retracted, and merely 10% will end up in a de-indexed journal. The path forward. The researchers acknowledged several limitations in their study. Primarily, scientific fraud is inherently secretive, and even comprehensive data may not accurately reflect its full extent. Detection and exposure patterns are influenced by available resources, attention, and specific vulnerabilities within fields. Nevertheless, the team concluded that the collective evidence indicates that the integrity of both the current scientific record and future research is being compromised to the very systems through which scientists assess each other's work. This study serves as both a critical warning and a call to action for the scientific community. Industrialized scientific fraud is no longer a minor issue, nor is it sufficiently deterred by existing measures. The researchers have unveiled a resilient network of actors incentivized to defect repeatedly, exploiting the weaknesses of the current system at the expense of genuine research and scientific advancement. As Luis A. Nunes Amaral, the senior author and a professor at Northwestern University, stated, "These networks are essentially criminal organizations collaborating to fabricate the scientific process. Millions of dollars are at stake in these operations. Without coordinated, well-resourced, and systematically independent strategies to detect, investigate, and penalize misconduct, the findings of this study suggest that the future of science may be increasingly shaped by those who find defection to be the most rational choice." Exposing the rise of organized scientific fraud, how fake science threatens research. The shocking rise of scientific fraud syndicates, what you need to know. A disturbing new investigation from Northwestern University reveals that organized scientific fraud networks are expanding at unprecedented rates, threatening the very foundation of academic integrity. While most people imagine scientific misconduct as the work of isolated researchers cutting corners, this groundbreaking study exposes something far more sinister. Sophisticated global criminal enterprises systematically undermining scientific publishing on an industrial scale. Even more alarming, these fraudulent publications are now growing faster than legitimate scientific research. Experts warn this represents an existential crisis for scientific credibility that demands immediate attention before public trust collapses entirely. The eye-opening research, titled "The Entities Enabling Scientific Fraud at Scale Are Large, Resilient, and Growing Rapidly," was recently published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Science must establish stronger self-policing mechanisms to safeguard its integrity, warned Northwestern's Luis A. N. Amaral, who led the investigation. If we fail to acknowledge and address this crisis, increasingly unethical practices will become normalized within scientific publishing. Eventually, we'll reach a tipping point where scientific literature becomes fundamentally corrupted. Some might argue that highlighting these problems undermines science itself, but I firmly believe we're actually protecting science from malicious actors. We need to fully recognize the severity of this threat and implement effective countermeasures immediately. Amaral, a complex social systems expert, serves as the Erastus Otis Haven Professor and Professor of Engineering Sciences and Applied Mathematics at Northwestern's McCormick School of Engineering. The study's first author is Reese Richardson, a postdoctoral researcher in Amaral's laboratory. Unmasking the shadow industry. The popular conception of scientific fraud typically involves headline-grabbing cases of individual researchers who falsify data, plagiarize work, or face paper retractions. These incidents are usually framed as isolated cases of personal ethical failures in a competitive academic environment. However, Amaral's team discovered something far more troubling lurking beneath the surface. An extensive underground network operating beyond public awareness. What we've uncovered are essentially criminal syndicates working together to counterfeit the scientific process, Amaral explained. The financial scale is staggering, with millions of dollars flowing through these operations. To expose these networks, the research team conducted a comprehensive analysis of multiple datasets, examining retracted publications, editorial records, and instances of duplicated images. Their investigation drew primarily from major scientific literature databases, including Web of Science, WOS, Elsevier's Scopus, the National Library of Medicine's PubMed Medline, and OpenAlex, which incorporates data from Microsoft Academic Graph, Crossref, ORCID, Unpaywall, and various institutional repositories. Richardson and colleagues also compiled information on de-indexed journals, scholarly publications removed from academic databases for failing to meet ethical or quality standards. Additionally, the team incorporated data from Retraction Watch on withdrawn articles, comments from PubPeer, and metadata from specific journals, including editor names and submission acceptance timelines. The fraudulent reputation marketplace. The team's analysis revealed coordinated operations involving paper mills, intermediary brokers, and compromised journals. These paper mills function as production facilities, mass-producing manuscripts that are then sold to academics seeking quick publication credits. The quality of these manufactured papers is abysmal, featuring invented data, manipulated or stolen images, copied content, and sometimes completely nonsensical or physically impossible claims. We're witnessing more researchers becoming entangled with paper mills, Amaral noted. Beyond simply purchasing papers, they can buy citations to artificially inflate their impact. This allows individuals to cultivate the appearance of respected scientists despite conducting minimal legitimate research themselves. Paper mills employ various business models, Richardson elaborated. We've only begun to understand their operational methods, but essentially, they sell anything that can launder academic reputations. They frequently sell authorship positions for hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Someone might pay premium rates for first. Unmasking research fraud, the battle against paper mills. The fight against coordinated publication fraud is a daunting task, akin to emptying an overflowing bathtub with a spoon, according to a study co-author. The study, published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, reveals that systematic research fraud has outpaced corrective measures and continues to accelerate at an alarming rate. The study examines research fraud carried out by paper mills, brokers, and predatory publishers, which produce low-quality or fabricated research, sell authorship, and publish without adequate quality control and peer review. These three groups are known to generate a significant volume of fraudulent research. Anna Ebelkina, a researcher at Freie Universität Berlin and creator of the Retraction Watch hijacked journal checker, praised the study, saying, "This is a great paper showing how much fraud there is in the scientific literature." The paper also looks at different methods on how to detect problematic papers, networks, and editors. Researchers and journalists have been investigating paper mills for over a decade, as they have affected multiple publishers. The latest study confirms that the volume of suspected paper mill products has been doubling more than twice as fast as corrective measures, such as retractions and crowdsourced comments flagging problematic papers on PubPeer. Louis Amaral, a professor at Northwestern University and co-author of the study, emphasized the severity of the issue, stating, "It's like emptying an overflowing bathtub with a spoon." To combat this systemic fraud, the researchers call for a global change in research incentives. The study examined metadata from the journal PLOS1 and DOIs from IEEE conference proceedings, along with the Retraction Watch database and PubPeer comments, to compile networks of editors who were significantly more likely to accept articles that eventually got retracted or flagged for concern. The researchers also analyzed the impact of fraud on certain subfields, focusing on RNA biology. They found that compromised subfields had a retraction rate of around 4%, while uncompromised ones remained lower at about 0.1%. Despite publishers' current efforts, the researchers calculated that only 28.7% of suspected paper mill products have been retracted. They extrapolated from current trends that only around 25% of suspected paper mill products will ever be retracted, and that only around 10% of suspected paper mill products will ever reside in a de-indexed journal. Amaral compared the scale of the issue to combating the ozone hole over Antarctica, stating that the scale of the solutions needs to match. He called for the biggest, most important stakeholders of science to come together to discuss and implement standards, rather than waiting for the problem to solve itself. Individuals can also play a role in advocating for change by pressing policymakers to end the culture of hyper-competition in science. Scientists can help address the problem by conducting post-publication peer review, taking a critical eye to the literature in their fields, and developing high-throughput approaches to identify problematic articles.